Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to G Bear's Off-Grid Ways, and I'm glad to be back. I really am. I've been stuck inside for the last few days and nights with constant winds. I've seen some of the winds actually getting close to 50 miles per hour. That's 50 miles per hour. And I'll tell you, it's been horrible. But look at the batteries. I mean, 13.9, 13.5, 14.1. That's what I've been dealing with. So it's been cold also, really cold. I mean, getting down in the high 30s at night and only getting up to the low 50s during the day. It was not very comfortable. But I'm out and about today because I got a few things that I need to address from some of my viewers. And I thought you might want to know that right now, see, I'm running at 13.8, 13.9, 13.7. So they're all right within the same area. But notice 0 watts, 0 amps coming in. And why? Because I'm on float. And I'm on float. Okay? So both of my controllers and my panels are floating right now because I got more power than I need. And guess what? To warm the cabin up all day long and save on propane heat, I've been running an electric radiator. Those are those oil-filled electric radiators. Not little thing. I mean, this thing, I'd have to go in the house to show you, but this thing would stand probably right up to the windowsill in your house, and it has 2 switches on it. One is for 600 watts, that's on low, and the other is for 900 watts, which would be medium if you kept the 600 switched off. But if you put both switches on, that's 1500 watts, 1500 watts. And look at my batteries. 14, 13. And I'm resting. I'm floating. I got more power than I need because the turbine is bringing in right now, even though the winds have died down a little bit, they're bringing in a minimum like here at 200 watts on an average. Okay? And my panels are all in direct sunlight, so they keep going to 14 and then going back down a little bit. And I suspect what's going on there is inside the cabin, that radiator, what it does is it heats up the oil inside to retain heat for a longer period of time. And as soon as that temperature of that oil drops a little bit, it'll kick back on again. But it will only kick on what it needs. So it's probably kicking on the low setting, which is the 600 watt. And when it does that, it drops it down from 14.2 down to 13.8, 13.9 in that area. So that's pretty cool, huh? And I've been doing this all week now, running that electric heater all day long. And jokingly, I said to Tony from doing Redneck Things Off Grid, I texted him and I told him what my numbers were, and he said they were great numbers. I said, yeah. And if it gets too hot in here, I can leave the heater on and turn the air conditioner on to cool it down. Oh yeah, that's a nice thing about having a good setup like this. And I tell you, I can't stress as much the midnight controllers. They are just fantastic. And Ames for the inverter. And I love the global low frequency series. And as you can see on here, it's a pure sine wave, and it's a 240 volt right there. So I've got just like the power in your house, I've got the same thing going into my breaker panel, my circuit panel. And then I've got a line that runs out through the conduit there, goes down underground and goes over to the shops and the containers. And I power my power tools in there with that. And I can work in there all day long, come in here, and I still have fully charged batteries. So, nice deal. All right. Some of the things I was asked. Wire gauges. Now, I was asked because the individual is going to be moving to the Philippines. And they're going to be using 220 volts with 60 hertz. Okay, so normally when I was in Europe, it was 220 volts with 50 hertz. But he said, yes, it's definitely 60 hertz. Okay, the only thing that matters at that point for what he's going to be doing is the inverter. Got to make sure that he gets an inverter that will handle the 220 volts, 60 hertz. And this one will. Okay, now in the United States, we call it 120/240. Years and years ago, it used to be 110/220. But since technology has gotten better, they've upped it now, so we're at 120/240. Putting out a little bit more voltage. And that brings me to the point. He's asking about the wire gauge coming from his panels inside and such and such and such. Okay? So the wire gauge. If you run your solar panels in parallel, what happens when you run them in parallel? We've been over this before. Is that your voltage stays the same, but your amps go up. So if you're running 12 volt panels, say a 100 watt panel, and it's putting out, say, 17 volts, and you connect those in parallel, which is all the positives together and all the negatives together, then what you're going to get there is the same 17 volts, but your amps are going to go up. So if each panel was, say, 5 amps, then you would go 5 times how many panels you have, and your amps went up. So when amps go up, so does your wire size. You have to use a larger size wire. So if you hook your panels in series, that's positive to negative, positive to negative, positive to negative, then you can increase your voltage, but your amps stay the same. So if you did the same thing with the same panels and you hooked them in series now, then you would have the volts would stay the same, so you'd still be at 17 volts on the series, but your volts would go up, but your amps would stay the same. So your volts are going to go up for each battery you connect. So if they're all 12 volt batteries and you've got 6 batteries, so it would be 6 times the 17 volts coming in would be your input voltage. So make sure your controller would handle it. Now the controller, when you always connect your batteries to your controller first, so the controller knows what battery bank you're using, what voltage battery bank you're using. And what that does is lets this thing set itself up to produce the best MPPT for a 12 volt battery system. Okay, so this one is the Midnight Classic 150. What that means is it'll handle 150 volts input. As you can see, I'm doing 107 volts input. So that's controlling my big solar panels out there, my 305 watt solar panels. Okay, so I did that on purpose. I didn't want to get too close to the 150. So I set them up to be at for 120 volts maximum. And right now I'm getting 107, which means my panels are probably a little bit dirty and need to be cleaned. Or the sun's not hitting directly on them. Either way, that's beside the point. Coming in from my panels, because I'm going with higher voltage and lower amperage, I can use a smaller wire. As you can see here, they're not very large wires. Now you do want to use PV wire. That's Papa Victor wires. The reason for that is PV wires are specifically designed to withstand the sunlight and all of that stuff. And if you use wires like this that you buy at Home Depot, the first thing that goes off is the outer plastic coating, which is a clear coating. That all dries up, cracks, and falls off. It's been falling off of this already. But these are not really good for outside. So these just come from my junction blocks there. And they run to the controllers indoors. Outdoors coming in, I'm using PV wire. That's the black one with the red on it. That's the positive side, and that's the black side, or the negative side. Okay, so the coming in from your panels, you want to use PV wire, and for your panels, use PV wire. So I have mine in series parallel. Now, just because you got more panels than what you can add together for voltage, let's say you have 6 panels, and the total of your 6 panels hooked up in series is going to be 480 volts. Well, you can't use 480 volts on the Midnight Classics, because the highest one they have is the Classic 200, which only handles 200 volts input. So you're going to have to cut that in half. So you split that into 2 strings, the strings being a group of panels. So 3 panels would be half of your input, which is 200, and the other 3 would be another 200. So you have 2 sets hooked in series and then tied together in parallel, the 2 strings tied in parallel. That's positive and positive, negative and negative, and then only the one positive and one negative wire coming into your controller. So you got 2 strings, and the volts don't go up when you're in parallel, right? Only the amps go up. So as long as your amps are within limit for what your controller will handle, you can run 2 strings, 3 strings, 4 strings, whatever, and stay below the maximum voltage. So if you'll go over that and you got more panels that you need to connect, then you just have to buy another controller. That's all there is to it. And you can add extra controllers. Now, one thing about a Midnight Classic controllers is some of them, not all of them, you have to make sure you specify it when you're buying it. They can be tied together and linked together so that one controller controls all the controllers. So you don't have to set up different parameters for each controller. You set up one controller, and then it will control the others that are attached to it. So it's like the master of the group. So that's a pretty cool feature that you can get with Midnight Classic. And I tell you, I haven't had any problems with this thing. It has been really doing its job, and as you can see, right now, my batteries are maxed out. It's resting. It's got nothing to do. So it's just sitting there and telling me what the voltage coming in is, but there's no watts and no amps coming in. All right. So I hope that explains that part for you. One more thing on the wire gauges. When you're connecting your batteries together, you want to use a pretty good size cable on that. So this is a number 2 cable. Okay, that's a good size cable to use. Now, I had some red and I had some black, but this is the positive side because my batteries are in series parallel. So connecting the positive to positive, I ran out of red wire, but I had black, so I just put some red shrink tube on the 2 ends to remind me that's a positive wire. All right, same thing over there. Got red shrink tube on the ends of the black wire. So it doesn't matter if you go into the store and they don't have enough red wire for you. Just get black wire and get some shrink tube that you can put on the ends of them, and that'll help you. Now you also want to pick up some of those battery cables, the ends, and for most batteries, the posts will handle a 5/16. So you can get a 5/16 size hole in there, but make sure it's for the right size wire. Okay, so that's for number 2 gauge wire. As you can see, it'll say it right in there, 2 gauge wire. And it's 5/16 diameter lug hole right at the top. So when you're doing those, you also want to solder them on. Don't crimp them, solder them. You're better off soldering them. So what I do is I clamp it in a pair of vice grips, heat it up with a little propane torch, melt a whole bunch of solder into the whole side where the wire is going to go, and then press the wire in it while it's still molten. And then I keep a wet rag handy. I just pick up the wet rag and cool that end, solidifies the solder, and I'm ready to move on to the next piece. So that's about all I can tell you. Now, last thing, and before I forget, is the wires coming from your battery bank up to your inverter. You want those to be really large. Okay, so I'm using, if I'm not mistaken, this is 2/0. That's a 2/0. That's a really heavy duty stranded welding cable wire. That's, you don't use solid wires. Whenever you're connecting DC, you're better off using stranded wire. So the stranded wire coming from my batteries. Now, the negative going to my inverter is on this battery over here. That's the last battery set of batteries in the bank. The positive is on the top up there. It goes up to the first battery in the bank. So you're sharing the whole set of batteries. Everything that you have in batteries, you're going across the whole set to power your inverter. And you get very little loss that way on your electricity. Okay, so just to recap and clear things up a little bit, remember, when your amps go up, wire size goes down. So if you're planning on connecting your solar panels in parallel, you're going to raise up your amps, not your voltage. So you're going to have to use thicker wire. If you're going to connect them in series, you're going to raise up your voltage and lower your amps. Because remember, the formula is watts equals volts times amps. So that is a given. That'll always be the same, and you can reverse that formula around any way you want. Watts divided by amps equals volts. Watts divided by volts equals amps. Amps times volts equals watts. So no matter how you figure it out, it's just like a mathematical equation. It'll always come out that it equals. So raising your voltage lowers your amps, but a good MPPT controller will adjust those volts and amps and give you the best output for your money right inside the system. So you're better off raising your voltage coming in so you can use smaller wire, and then let the controller change your voltage, the excess voltage, to amps at the controller and feed that to your system. All right? Thanks for joining me. I know this went a little bit long, but there was a lot of information to get out there. I'm glad you could stop by today. Tony and Leanna getting a well put in. I'm jealous. I wish I could here, but not in this area. Just the math doesn't work. And it'd be $40-something thousand before I got a well established, and then I'd have to put a meter on it and pay for the water I use. Pretty stupid, isn't it? All right, everybody. Thanks for joining me. This is G Bear reminding you, thumbs up down there. Don't forget to subscribe and share. G Bear signing off.